President Olin, thank you as well for the invitation today. Brian presented this to me, and he said that the council wants to get together, and I said, well, Brian, what do you mean the council? The council delegates? And he says, no, there's a newly created council of our friends that have gotten together with leaders from the chapters that have organized. And so I want to commend you, the leadership with Vice President Morris and our Secretary Treasurer Yazi, the composition and the courage of the 5 chapters and the leaders that are here with us today for doing this. It's sometimes challenging, and I apologize for putting my back to you, President. I'll try to keep my back this way. It's sometimes challenging when you're asked to come together to create something new. But through your advocacy, you're coming together in numbers to make sure you look after the community. And I want to commend you for that courage in coming forward. It's out of respect as your United States representative, Mr. President, that I'm here before you, the council, and the chapter's leaders that have extended the invitation to be here. Also in front of President Shalley and the First Lady, to be able to address you today and give you a bit of an update based on your questions, in addition to anything else that you'd like to put on the table that we may be able to address today. I think it's important in appreciating and learning from the President's words. I think it's important that we understand that the United States of America has trust responsibilities to tribal members all across the United States. And it's for that reason that we need to make sure that we work together. There's a reason why when my dear colleague Del Kildee, a former congressman from Michigan, whenever he would speak, and he retired from Congress this last year, when he would speak, he'd reach into his pocket and he would pull out the United States Constitution. And he would remind members of Congress that don't have the honor of representing tribes that in the United States Constitution is where sovereignty is recognized. And the clause that respects the treaties of the United States, the treaties that were entered into with all of our sovereign nations, with our tribal nations, to make sure we work together. And the importance of what I agree with what President Shelley was advocating through self-determination, President, of what we need to do and where the BIA could transition. When the BIA was created, it was a different time in our nation's history. But as we talk about self-determination and resources and developing those technical skills and the complexities with your ability to be able to invest in infrastructure, job creation, agricultural businesses, encouraging entrepreneurs, I certainly agree that the transition from the BIA should be to a support and development office to make sure that they help with those technical support systems wherever they're needed to be able to develop those internal opportunities. And so you have my commitment to work in those areas. The American Recovery and Reinvestment Act delivered investment all across the United States. Some would suggest that the Reinvestment and Recovery Act, which was called stimulus, didn't put investment into the ground. I would invite you to go for a walk down the road, down the very road that we drove in on with 491. The American Recovery and Reinvestment Act brought in hundreds of millions of dollars for much of the progress that we saw today. But sadly, it didn't complete the project. And I appreciate the mentioning of the concern that many of us had. And I'm glad to hear the Navajo Nation had many concerns with why the state of New Mexico did not move forward with the Tiger Grant last year. It's not because, and I appreciate how lighthearted the President was, because the Navajo Nation didn't ask for that support. The Navajo Nation did ask for that support. And that Tiger Grant should have been submitted, in my opinion. But nonetheless, we're here today. And at least by the end of business today, towards the end of the week, there will be a Tiger Grant that will be submitted. And the Navajo leaders will be heard and be listened to. And we need to work together to make sure that we advocate for that Tiger Grant to add to those hundreds of millions of dollars that came to make more progress on 491. And yes, anytime that we hear Senator Pinto, he doesn't even say hello first anymore. He says, finish 491. And then he says, hello, how is your family? But it's the first words out of our good senator's mouth to my ears. And so we want to thank everyone here as well. When we talk about the importance of working with the nation and with the President's office and the importance of our council delegates, I also want to recognize Council Delegate Begay, who has taken time to be able to be with us today as well. I appreciate the conversations that I've had with Mr. Begay, as well as our responsibilities as a legislative branch, working government to government as well. And again, Mr. President, it's out of that respect that I'm here today. As a United States representative, out of my deep and profound respect for the Navajo Nation, for our council delegates, for the executive branch, for the chapters, and now for the council, Mr. President. So we hope to see more councils being put together. So with that, Mr. President, I want to go into a few of the areas that you asked specifically of where we were with the Congress and what's happened. Many of us have come to learn the word and the term sequestration. It's a term that wasn't talked about before from a policy perspective, because even though it had been talked about before in the Reagan administration, it had never been implemented. It was a thought of an idea that fortunately went away and escaped us in our nation's history for many, many years, but sadly found its way into policy approximately 18 months ago. You'll remember that when there was a conversation around the United States about a debt ceiling, this notion that the United States has a limit based on how much it can pay for bills that it's incurred, not bills that it's going to come into, but bills that we incur. So it's to buy all the investment that we put into, the investments in military, the investments in infrastructure, whatever projects have already been completed, to pay those bills, not for new projects. And so the United States has never defaulted. There's been a few times where there's been a scare, but the Congress always came forward and lifted that debt ceiling to pay the bills that we incurred. Under President Reagan, we did it 19 times. Under President Bush the first, I think we did it 13 times. Under President Clinton, we did it several times. Under President Bush the second, we did it several times. And now under President Barack Obama, we've done it a few times as well. But never before has there been a threat of default to the point where the deals that were put on the table to increase the debt ceiling were put upon us. The sequestration was part of this deal. It was an idea that was supposed to be so bad, that smelled so rotten, that tasted so evil, that no one would want it at their table. The sequestration set up mandatory across the board 10% reductions in spending. Even in programs that members of Congress and others believed in from their heart of hearts that impacted their districts, they still would take an axe to it and take a 10% across the board cut. What that means, if this policy would go into place, we would see 10% reductions with IHS, Indian Health Services, 10% reductions in education, 10% reduction in food programs, 10% reduction in the military, 10% reduction in every program that we've been able to depend on to make investments in the United States. Because members of Congress could not get along and could not negotiate. And we know the importance of negotiating. You don't always get your way completely, but you put on the table with what you're willing to negotiate and walk away from. So that way, for the greater good, we can move progress. So what does the sequester brought us? The sequestration impacts that we've seen specifically to tribes. The Department of Interior stated that the tribes would lose almost $130 million, impacting areas such as human services, law enforcement, schools, economic development, and natural resources. In IHS alone, sequestration would result in about 3,000 fewer inpatient admissions and 804 fewer outpatient visits provided in IHS and tribal hospitals and clinics. That's the concern of where we are with the clinic that provides services to so many right in the community. Right now, because of sequester, because of this bad policy, that's what's happening. And the reason I can say that this is a bad policy, some members of Congress voted for it. It's how it became law. Your member of Congress, me, I have not voted for sequestration, not once. There was a chance for us to vote no when there was a bill called the Budget Control Act. I voted no. There was a chance with a tax deal that was put together at the end of 2012 that included aspects of sequestration. I voted no. There was two continuing resolutions that we voted on that provided short-term funding for the federal government, that codified, that made sequester permanent, and I voted no on both of those. I fundamentally believe that it was bad for New Mexico, that it was bad for the country, which is why I opposed it. You can see why sequestration is so bad. Even though members of Congress say that they don't like it, they still won't vote to overturn it, Mr. President. And you can see that dilemma and that problem. That's why we're seeing these problems with the clinic, with IHS, right, in the community. But I can say this, because of the rural nature of how this clinic provides services, there's some people that don't understand that we drive 30 miles or 40 miles one way from our homes, sometimes down dirt roads, that we can't afford to pay to get these services. It's not like we live in New York City where there's a clinic every block, and they can close a clinic here and a clinic there, and instead of having to go one block, now you just have to go two. Over here, when they close a clinic, it changes from 30 miles to 60 miles one way. And we need people that are making these decisions to understand that. The same impact that we're having with the post office. A piece of legislation that we have advocated for that would solve this artificially created problem, like the sequester, Mr. President. There was a piece of legislation that was put into law right before I became a member of Congress that required the post office to pay advance payments for the retirement of its employees. Upwards of 110% for each one. More than what any other federal agency or private sector requires of their employees. And don't let people tell you that the post office is run by taxpayer dollars. They say that it's the worst run federal agency. The U.S. Post Office survives on the stamps that you buy to mail your letters, to mail your boxes. That's what funds the United States Post Office. And when they say that the U.S. Post Office is out of funds and they have to reduce the number of places that are providing service, the number of post offices, all that members of Congress have to do is fix the bad law that was put in place 6 years ago. If we didn't require the advance payment funds where the post office is paying into solvency beyond their needs, we would improve and strengthen the solvency of the post office. And we wouldn't see this notion of closing of facilities or even this notion of reduction of services on Saturday. All it takes is the Congress to vote on one bill, pass the Senate, pass the House, and send it to the President. And we'd be able to fix these problems. But with that being said, we had some success with them shutting as many rural post offices as they said that they would, and we need to continue to work together to advocate for that. That's where we need the community, through petitions, through letters, through your advocacy as chapter leaders, but also through the elders, to make sure that Congress and the United States Post Office Board of Governors know that you need these post offices to be able to get your medication or be able to get your bills paid or whatever it may be to run your small businesses, that we need these critical services. Indian education. Some key education programs would feel the impact of sequestration immediately. Impact Aid serves approximately 113,000 Native students. Many school districts qualifying for Impact Aid receive a high percentage of their overall funding. New Mexico's formula is different, and that's another conversation to have. But nonetheless, $60 million for Impact Aid could immediately be gone. In New Mexico, just off the Navajo Reservation, the Gallup-McKinley County Public Schools would lose about $2 million of funds from Impact Aid, including 6,700 students who live on Indian lands. Impact Aid funds make up 35% of the district's total budget. You can see what that dramatic impact does as a result of sequestration. The last thing, Mr. President, that I'll touch on is economic recovery. We've heard from the President the importance of empowering entrepreneurs. to have more Navajo-owned businesses here in the communities where you can support one another, build these businesses, transform a community, support that entrepreneurial spirit. When we talk about being able to move forward to help leverage programs, from 1990 to 2007, tribes reduced the percentage of tribal citizens in poverty on tribal lands by more than 1/3. The poverty rate for all reservations of American Indians and Alaska Natives in 1991 was 51%. That dropped to 39 in 2000, but is sadly on the increase. The infrastructure opportunities so that way we can strive to have our businesses, water, wastewater infrastructure, internet access, roads and bridges that help pave the way so that way we can help these businesses are now put in jeopardy because of sequestration again. When we see these devastating impacts, in my opinion, because Congress did not do its job. When the Congress put sequestration in place, we neglected our responsibilities that you have. When you look at your budgets, you don't just come in for a meeting in 10 minutes and say, well, we're going to cut the budget 20% across the board, business is done, everybody go home and have a good day. You do the hard work, you look at those budgets and you go line by line. And you see where you can cut and where you find inefficiencies, but where you need to make investments as well. That's where the Congress got this one wrong. They just said across the board, we're going to cut. We're not going to go in and surgically understand line by line how we have to do our work and make the tough decisions. And that's what I would offer that the Congress must do in order for us to get where we need to be. So, Mr. President, as we talk about the importance of infrastructure still, we see the construction going on with the Navajo Nation water pipeline. That's positive. This is a project that was also supported through the advocacy of Senator Bingaman, now United States Senator Heinrich, Senator Udall, and myself. It was a priority from all of our offices to be able to make sure that the Bureau of Reclamations would support this water project, and it's at the top of the list. But we have to do our due diligence internally to make sure that this project continues to make advances, that we put those dollars into the ground, that we continue to hire people to make this project work. And that is critically important. So let's make sure we continue to work together, Mr. President, so that we can make that project come to fruition. And lastly, President, as I go to questions, I want to acknowledge some of the students that also walked into the room. We've seen two things happen recently. We had a debate last week on how much student aid would make itself available so students would be able to access education. There was a big debate on the floor last week whether we would allow federal student interest loans to double in their cost, from 3.4% to 6.8%. This would cost the average student between $3,000 and $5,000 every year if they were able to secure a federal loan to be able to go to college. We lost the debate on the floor. If this goes into effect, it will hurt students. And we need to make sure that we stand up to those that were trying to reverse these rates, that we're trying to double these rates, and make sure that we prevent them from putting those in place. We need to invest in the future of our students, and especially when it comes to education. And lastly, President, just to our veterans that are here in the room, and those of you that have veterans, whether they're spouses or brothers or sisters or children, we have heroes that walk amongst us every day. And on Monday we remembered them with Memorial Day. But it shouldn't just be Memorial Day that we honor those that have worn the uniform and that have made those sacrifices for us. And so to each and every one of you, I just want to say thank you. We have a proud tradition, especially on the Navajo Nation, of those who have served. And when you see them, tell them thank you. Acknowledge them. And just appreciate what they've done so that way we can be here today and speak freely. Speak freely in this great nation of ours. And so with that, Mr. President, I'll turn back over the microphone. If there's any questions, I'd be honored to entertain them. But thank you for your service as well, sir. And I look forward to the questions. Thank you for having me, and thank you for the invitation.